Dear friends, welcome to my channel. This is Times Berezovets. Today we will discuss the scandals that followed the 16th BRICS summit, which concluded in the capital of Tatarstan, Kazan, and the consequences that have reached far away. South Africa, where there is a government crisis due to ambiguous statements made by the country's president, Cyril Ramaphosa, particularly compliments directed at a dictator, Putin has not been well received by many of his associates. The American publication New York Times conducted a thorough investigation regarding a video about the deaths of civilians in the Kursk region. Russian volunteers unjustly accuse Ukrainian military personnel of the deaths of these civilians. Nevertheless, the journalists of the New York Times wrote a somewhat ambiguous, shall we say, piece, including references to Russian sources, which naturally accuse the Ukrainian military of committing war crimes. Looking ahead, convincing evidence for this has not been presented. President Zelensky, in an interview with the leading Indian publication, Times of India, proposed that the country host a second peace summit and act as a mediator in negotiations with Russia. Russia is the only country that can equally accommodate both Kiev and Moscow. Details of the missile attack carried out by Israel on targets in Iran, during which all three S-3 complexes of Russian production were destroyed, and how Russia carefully conceals its defeat of some of its most advanced systems. The United States does not intend to limit the use of its weapons against North Korean troops. This was stated by the spokesperson for the USA Pentagon, Sabrina Toz Singh. Representatives of South Korea have also intensified their efforts, particularly Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun and the head of the South Korean Foreign Ministry, Choi Hee-yeon. Finally, Zelensky requested the USA to provide strategic missiles. In secret, additional provisions. Tomahawk with a range of up to 2,500 kilometers. Meanwhile, President Zelensky reacted to the deployment of North Korean military personnel to Russia. Chechnya was attacked by a drone for the first time since the beginning of the war. Kadyrov is currently on a visit to Bahrain. He stated that today a drone attacked the Russian Special Forces University named after Vladimir Putin in Gudermes. Is this related to an attack from Ukraine, or could it be the work of Kadyrov's enemies, to whom he recently declared blood vengeance? And finally, about 200 former military personnel from North Korea have expressed their willingness to come to Ukraine as psychological warfare agents. These are defectors who escaped, I will say right away, from North Korea, who are ready to participate in this war to undermine the North Korean contingent. And possibly not only propaganda, but also other special operations. Friends, we will talk about everything further. Thus, the New York Times published an investigation regarding the deaths of civilians in the Kursk region, where Ukrainian defense forces entered starting from August 6, 2024, as the publication writes. In total, about 70 civilians have died in the Kursk region since that time. The New York Times examined in particular the incident in the Russian village of Korenevo. A video was recorded by Russian military personnel from a drone, showing at least 7 bodies lying on the road, most of them in civilian clothing. The publication spoke with Russian volunteer Marina Skrob, who told the New York Times that the bodies of 15 deceased individuals were found in this location. However, the publication notes that there is no independent confirmation of this figure. It is also unknown whether all the deceased were civilians. However, Marina Skrob claims without basis that allegedly all of them were killed by Ukrainian military forces who were shooting at fleeing civilians from Korenevo. The New York Times reports that the volunteer did not provide convincing evidence for her words. Naturally, Ukraine denies such unsubstantiated accusations. In this area, the publication reports, fierce battles were taking place between Russian and Ukrainian military forces. Fire was exchanged from both sides, making it impossible to determine who is responsible for the deaths. Skrob also claims that the deceased allegedly fell into an ambush on August 11th. Another episode is related to the village of Kurilov in the Kasujansky district, where some local residents in Russia also claim, citing some unclear witnesses, that allegedly Ukrainian military forces shot at fleeing civilians. The New York Times itself writes that it is difficult to verify this data due to the ongoing fighting. It also mentions a well-known episode that was overlooked by the media, including Ukrainian media outlets that reported on it. 28-year-old Russian woman Nina Kuznetsova, who was pregnant at the time of her death, was killed. Also killed was 28-year-old Alexei Trubitsin. According to sources from the New York Times, when they tried to retrieve Alexei's body, for his mother, I apologize. For his sister, Ukrainian military personnel approached and stated that his vehicle had run over an anti-tank mine. However, it is unknown who installed the grain device. There is also one more video that was managed to. According to the New York Times, it has been verified that 2 Ukrainian soldiers allegedly claimed that a cruel man in the Sujita area is a Russian pig. In fact, it later turned out that this so-called Russian pig was actually a Ukrainian. He has a Ukrainian passport, which was established later. Also in this video, which Russian propagandists heavily promoted, one of the recorded characters is wearing a helmet with Nazi symbols from the Second World War. The New York Times writes about a world war. Again, there is no verified evidence that it was the Ukrainian military. Moreover, even then, a version emerged that was more than convincing, suggesting that this video is actually staged. Just like other videos that have been circulated and which I have also analyzed in detail on my channel and in the program Vlastnoe. In particular, the video shows 2 people with a strong Russian accent trying to imitate Ukrainian speech, supposedly visiting a resident of some village. She tells them, "You shot half the village, I refuse to accept humanitarian aid from you." Shoves the box at them and shouts at the end, "Victory will be ours." But this video was later confirmed to have been filmed at the adversary's propaganda factory. In fact, the opponent produces such fakes by the dozens, and therefore relying on such statements is, let's say, quite a questionable endeavor. Meanwhile, President Zelensky, in an interview with the Indian publication Times of India, proposed that the country become a mediator. In the negotiations, he stated that Modi could become a mediator between Ukraine and Russia. And for this, President Zelensky proposed to hold the Second Peace Summit specifically in India. Modi can really do this. Zelensky stated, "As is known, Russia has criticized the holding of the First World Summit, which took place in Switzerland, and has stated that it is not ready to participate in such a format." Nevertheless, Putin stated that he is in constant contact with the leadership of China, Brazil, and India. These 3 countries are acceptable to him regarding the resolution of the conflict. However, while they refer to it as a war, China also calls it a conflict. However, the approach of China and Brazil, as expressed in their joint statement adopted in the communiqué of May 2024, did not receive support from the majority of countries in the world, including Ukraine. India did not join this communiqué document, so India's approach is considered, shall we say, the most neutral. From this perspective, India is seen as a country that could truly become a platform for such negotiations. However, to jump ahead, I will say that there is no reaction or readiness from Russia to conduct such negotiations. All such statements by Putin, Lavrov, and other representatives of the criminal Kremlin regime are nothing more than an attempt to create a smokescreen. The Kremlin is not showing any real readiness for negotiations. Meanwhile, as reported by the mentioned publication New York Times, Zelensky, he appealed to the Biden administration to provide more powerful long-range weapons, specifically Tomahawk missiles with a range of 2,500 kilometers. As the New York Times writes, Washington received Zelensky's victory plan, which he presented in September to Biden, Trump, Kamala Harris, and other Western allies rather coldly and in a secret, let's say, annex. In the appendix, Zelensky suggested measures for non-nuclear deterrence of Russia. In particular, it included the provision of Tomahawk missiles, cruise missiles that have strategic and tactical modifications. They are designed for targeting ground objects as well as destroying surface ships. Ranges 2,500 kilometers. However, all new modern models and their specifications, in particular, the range is strictly maintained. In secret. And naturally, since there was no response from the administration of President Joe Biden, it follows that they declined. Take Zelensky. Meanwhile, sources in Zelensky's office confirmed to New York Times journalists that he himself was stunned by such a response. In particular, Zelensky's advisor, Dmitry Litvin, stated that all the details of the list of targets provided by the American argument are available, but there is still no political solution. Thus, we can conclude from this that the corresponding decision is made by the Biden administration. It is not going to be accepted, as such are apparently the recommendations from both the Pentagon and key national security advisors to President Biden. Here we might say that the most sensational aspect is the request for that specific type of weapon, which has appeared repeatedly in military experts' forecasts, but again was considered an unrealistic idea. Since Tomahawks have a range that exceeds attack missiles by 7 times, ultimately, the Americans were transferred. Meanwhile, Joe Biden himself reacted to the deployment of North Korean troops to Russia. He called it a dangerous event against the backdrop of their participation in the war on the side of Russia. Very dangerous. Pentagon representative official spokesperson Sabrina Singh, it confirmed the dispatch of 10,000 North Korean soldiers to Russia for training and participation in the war against Ukraine over the next few weeks. Part of the North Korean military, as it stated, has already moved to the border with Ukraine. It is highly likely that these North Korean mercenaries are moving towards the Kursk region. However, the Pentagon has no further details. At the same time, data from South Korean intelligence indicates that there have been about 3,000 of North Korean soldiers may be in close proximity or already on the territory of the Kursk region. Earlier, it was reported that 1,500 units of elite North Korean special forces had allegedly already arrived in the Kursk region. Meanwhile, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Secretary of State Antony Blinken are hosting South Korean Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun and South Korean Foreign Minister Choi Hee-yeon this week. We see actions being taken very actively today by the official Seoul. South Korea is acting proactively in this situation. Another piece of evidence is that they are sending 200 former North Korean army deserters who fled to South Korea to Ukraine to allegedly start a psychological war against the North Korean military. This is reported by the South China Morning Post. A group of former soldiers of Kim Jong-un aims to use their insider knowledge of the North Korean army's tactical peculiarities to disorganize and demoralize North Korean troops sent to fight in the Kursk region as well as in Ukraine. In particular, the publication quotes the words of a 69-year-old defector named An Chang-il, which is evidently his real name, who stated that military veterans who understand the military culture and psychological state of North Korea better than anyone else are planning to go to North Korea to Ukraine, and this transfer may happen very soon. We are ready to go wherever necessary, working as agents of psychological warfare. Another name of one of the members of this North Korean group of defectors, Lee Min-bok, who stated that he published an open letter to the Ukrainian embassy in Seoul, directly addressing Vladimir Zelensky, with a request to allow assistance in saving North Korean soldiers, whom he refers to as cannon fodder. It is unknown how the Ukrainian authorities reacted to this address, and in fact, it is unclear whether the Ukrainian side accepted this proposal. Meanwhile, it is reported that North Korean media published all photos of Youth League representatives signing petitions for military enlistment. A mass call from North Korea shows at least 300,000 volunteers have expressed readiness to serve in the country's army, OPE. However, it is not clear where they will actually be sent, with some suggesting Russia. The discussion was primarily about their readiness to join the ranks of the North Korean army. As we can see, the South Korean government is currently acting much more proactively, decisively, and most importantly, effectively compared to other allies. It has also been repeatedly claimed that this country, possessing one of the most powerful armies in the world, South Korea's army traditionally ranks among the top 10 armies globally and has one of the strongest defense industrial sectors, can supply a range of weapons to Ukraine. In particular, it refers to tanks, armored personnel carriers, artillery shells, as well as other types of weapons. Meanwhile, another ally of Russia in the Middle East is Iran. Suffered a serious defeat, humiliating. And along with it, Russia also suffered a humiliating defeat, specifically 3 Russian S-300 complexes. As reported by the Wall Street Journal, citing American and Israeli sources, by launching a missile strike on Iran, Israel simultaneously struck Russia twice. In particular, military factories were hit, which the supply of Iranian ballistic missiles to Russia will cease. Secondly, the acquired Russian S-300 air defense systems were unable to do anything against American missiles. According to the Wall Street Journal, all 3 S-300 systems have been destroyed. Prior to this, another Iranian S-300 complex of Russian production was disabled during a strike earlier this year. More than 100 aircraft from the Israeli Air Force participated in this attack, including F-35 stealth fighters. Israel was able to disable 12 installations where fuel for Iranian ballistic missiles was produced, including those intended for supply to the Russian army and for delivery to Yemeni Houthis. Iran does not have its own technology to restore this equipment, so the production of missiles may not resume for at least another year. And this is the saddest news for Russia, as well as a serious blow regarding the reputation of Russian weaponry. The produced items, which, to be honest, have already significantly lost their value. It was previously reported that a number of countries, particularly the largest buyer of Russian weapons, India, is considering the possibility of entering into contracts with Western companies, primarily American, British, and French defense contractors. Russia is actively purchases weapons from its allies. In particular, this week information emerged that Russia has acquired weapons worth $5.5 billion from North Korea, a huge amount of money that the North Korean regime needs. By the way, all of this violates the resolutions of the UN Security Council. The purchase of weapons from the North Korean regime, which these types of objects, goods are located under embargo. Well, however, it is not the first time for Russia to violate the regime of international sanctions. The most important thing is that the impunity demonstrated today by the UN as well as the international community regarding Russia's absolutely unpunished violations of all conceivable and inconceivable embargo regimes continues unabated. Moreover, Russia is openly mocking international law. Meanwhile, Chechnya, which is located at least 1,000 kilometers away from the territories controlled by the armed forces of Ukraine, was today subjected to a drone strike. This was reported by the head of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov, who is on a visit to Bahrain. He stated that he was attacked today at the Russian Special Forces University, named after Vladimir Putin, which he established in the city of Gudermes. This is the first such case of an attack in Chechnya. As Kadyrov wrote, the attack occurred on the morning of October 29th. The roof of an abandoned building on the territory of the Special Forces University caught fire. According to Kadyrov, there are no casualties or injuries, and the fire has been extinguished. The Telegram channel Balza published a corresponding photo of this fire. There have been no comments from Ukrainian special services or military at this time. Strikes had previously been carried out in many regions and at greater distances of over 1,000 kilometers within the territory of the Russian Federation. However, I will reiterate that there is no confirmation that the strike originated from the Ukrainian side. This can also be viewed in the context of the blood feud and war that Kadyrov himself has waged against his enemies in neighboring Ingushetia and Dagestan. Given the state of war, one cannot exclude the version that his enemies could have intentionally launched a corresponding drone from the territory of Ingushetia and Dagestan, understanding that they would likely be blamed. Kadyrov himself has not yet commented on the matter regarding the Ukrainian side. In his Telegram channel, he does not specify who the source of this attack is. He simply states that it occurred. Again, the drone, or rather its parts that survived the fire, will be examined and then it is likely that they will be able to determine the model of this drone and make further conclusions about who might have ultimately launched it. I will reiterate, we cannot exclude the version that this is purely an internal conflict. By the way, the University for Special Forces, which was created and grandly presented by Kadyrov, where he brought many representatives of the Russian elite, including Putin, is presented as the only unique institution that trains narrow-profile special forces specialists. However, there are significant doubts about whether he created it exclusively in the interests of Russia. It seemed more like he was establishing it as a personal university for training his own special forces for the moment, when Chechnya would be able to wage a war for independence. The possibilities of this are considered at another point. For now, he is fulfilling the role of training personnel for Kadyrov's war against numerous internal enemies. We see such situations arise constantly. In other words, this is purely a feudal story. Of course, he was not creating it for Putin. He was creating it for his own needs. Finally, there is news about the scandal that erupted in the South African government after President Cyril Ramaphosa's return and the comments he made during the 16th BRICS summit, which took place in Kazan. Putin's relations and the compliments he paid, calling South Africa a valuable ally and a valuable friend, have drawn sharp criticism from his coalition partners. As is known, Cyril Ramaphosa represents the African National Congress, ANC, whose militants were trained and financed at one time by the Soviet special services during the struggle against apartheid. And so they have long-standing ties with Russian intelligence services. Well, that's how it turned out. So the ANC's partners in the government coalition, the Democratic Alliance. The coalition was formed after the May elections when, for the first time in 30 years since the end of the apartheid era, the African National Congress was unable to secure a majority. And these comments, the compliment directed at Putin from Ramaphosa, really infuriated many. The coalition partner of the leader of the Democratic Alliance and concurrently the Minister of Agriculture of South Africa, John Steenhuisen, stated that while Ramaphosa may consider Putin a friend, for South Africa, Putin represents an authoritarian regime that violates international law by waging a predatory imperialist war against a sovereign state. Such a regime is certainly not acceptable for South Africa. If Ramaphosa wants to be friends with an imperialist warmonger like Putin, that is his business, said Emma Powell, the Democratic Alliance's representative for international policy. Ramaphosa was accused of double standards, as his government did not condemn the start of the war against Ukraine in 1922. However, in January 1924, explaining, although South Africa's policy adhered to the traditional policy of non-alignment, he nevertheless violated this principle by turning to the International Court of the UN, accusing Israel of genocide against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. The Ramaphosa government also ordered Taiwan to move its embassy from Pretoria to Johannesburg, where the trade representation is based. The Democratic Alliance accused Ramaphosa of appeasement to a longtime partner of the People's Republic of China. In short, he laid the groundwork for his own double standards and has now faced an internal conflict and government crisis as a result. We see how such crises, spawned by Putin, are spreading. This is such an anti-Midas. And I remind you, this is the manure Führer, thanks to the gift that Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi gave him during the BRICS summit in Kazan. And he gifted, I remind you, a painting that was made in techniques of making bricks from clay and cow dung. This is such cow dung. This is such a dung Führer, and we see that he continues to sow discord and further scandals around him. These are our news, friends, of an international and military nature as of today. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, like, share, comment, and dance. Don't forget to recommend the video to your friends and acquaintances. Thank you to all the sponsors, partners, and friends for your invaluable support. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the armed forces of Ukraine, glory to the Ukrainian Special Forces. This was Major Times Berezovets of the Ukrainian Army. Until we meet again, bye-bye.